I sat down in 2009. I had been doing music. I had been writing things, but I've been kind of all over the place with it. I tried screenplays, I tried poems, and they were cool, but I was like that struggling artist. So thank God I was on the ambulance and that was paying my bills so I could struggle all I wanted on the artistic realm. But I knew at some point I wanted to get off that damn ambulance because I was tired of taking drunks and nosebleeds to the hospital. That's not why I got into it, you know what I mean? So I sat down in 2009 and I was like, let me write a book. I was like, let me write a book. I loved Harry Potter. I really love Harry Potter. And I read all of them. And I was like, and it was like, it was an event when a Harry Potter book came out. I think you guys were alive then, right? Yeah, but you were like, oh my God, a new Harry Potter book. For me, that was really exciting. And at the same time, I was very aware of the disconnect that there was with Harry Potter because he's just like this random white dude, like all the other heroes in all the other big fantasy books that have ever been published, essentially. And I was tired of that. And I wanted to see, Latinos in those stories. And I wanted to see black folks in those stories. And I didn't, want it to be in a cheeky or coy way where they were winking at me. I wanted it to feel real, I was already then aware that there is false diversity and there is true diversity. And true diversity doesn't even require the word diversity because it's just natural. It's just what it is. And that's what kind of gets me about the whole diversity conversation is, the fact that we have to have the conversation is actually unnatural. That's a forced conversation. The word diversity, it's come to lose its meaning. It doesn't have any power analysis behind it. It doesn't have any meaning. And when you have words like that become devoid of meaning, there's a great danger in it because we could be fighting like crazy for diverse books and get them, and they don't really speak to us at all because they're just essentially white people with brown faces painted on them. And then they say, look, you got your diverse books. Are you happy? Great, bye. Next conversation. And that's what has happened historically, and that's something we always need to be clear about. So I sat down and I said, not only do I want to write a book that's, has people of color front and center, but also that to be clear about diversity of narrative styles, diversity of voice, diversity of rhythm. All these things are different across the world, and within different communities and cultures, we all have different ways of speaking, different ways of seeing the world, different ways of being, and different understandings of knowledge. But one form, whiteness, has dominated the publishing industry in the larger United States. That's something we need to be able to, first of all, say out loud and understand. What is that? What is the meaning of that? What is the power of that? And then how do we move strategically to stop that, to end that situation so we can have a more equitable bookshelf and publishing world? And so that writers of color are not constantly struggling just to tell our most basic truths. So those were the questions that I was going in with. I sat down to write this book, and I was thinking, like, that'd be so cool to have a young adult, but magical world. I was thinking, like, The Wire meets Harry Potter. That would have been the elevator pitch, right? Because I also love The Wire. And I was like, and that's a lot of people's truths. There's a lot of America that our truth is The Wire. And the part of that is because The Wire shows so many different levels of society. It's not just a story about the hood. It's not just a story about rich kids. It's a story that allows all these different narratives to crash into each other in a very complicated and ugly way. And that's a truth. That's a truth that we all know. Unlike something like a narrative of race like Crash, which kind of just says, oh, well, everybody's complicated, like throws it up. That's not helpful. Like, we really need power analyses to happen when we're talking about race in America, because race in America is entirely contingent on power. It's all about power. If you can't talk about power and race, then don't even bother talking about race. Then you're just having like a little half-assed conversation. And no one can afford to have a half-assed conversation, especially right now in this urgent situation that we're living through. So, with all that in my mind, I sat down to write a book that became Shadowshaper. When I first sat down to write it, it was called Sierra Santiago and the Invisible City. And it was very magical and whimsical at the same time as being very based in Brooklyn. I mean, that's still basically the what's going on. There was a lot more monsters. The version now is more ghosts, and it's gone a couple years up. It's more for teenagers. The one that I first sat down to write, I didn't know what I was doing. So I was like, and Harry Potter, if you look at the course of the series, it goes basically from middle grade to young adult. And there's some real interesting turning points, which we can get into down the road. But so I was, just looking at that, and it was kind of all over the place. I was kind of all over the place, and it was kind of a kid's book and kind of a YA book or whatever. And there were all these ridiculous monsters living in the invisible city. It was like there was a hidden Brooklyn full of monsters that was like just under the surface. And it was really fun to write. I mean, I just had a good time. I was just like, because I love living in Brooklyn. I'm not from Brooklyn originally. I've been there for 11 years. But I love living there. And when I walk around, it speaks to me. So sitting down to write a book about that was just about telling the truth to me. Um, Especially because I had seen Brooklyn from the back of an ambulance. And I knew its tragedies and its sorrows and its traumas and its ridiculous and hilarious moments and its intense humanity. And those are things that you have to know about a place if you're going to write a book about it. And what I wasn't seeing was that reflected in other books that I was reading about Brooklyn or about the city. And that felt to me like this huge opening in literature that is unfulfilled.